to start off with the page that's entitled Umbrella Company Engagements 2 of 2. That's probably a nice, easy place to start. And there's 3 examples of how the supply chain works. John, talk us through the first, what this means, and where liability sits.
Okay, sure. So this is a scenario where you have a worker engaged under a contract for employment by an umbrella. So I would say this is the most typical one, and the one that people will think of first when looking at the joint and several liability legislation. As you can see from the slide, there are 3 examples. I'm sure there are more, but these are the common 3. The first one, which is not that common, is where an umbrella worker is engaged by an umbrella, employed by an umbrella, and supplied directly to the end client. The second one is the only difference between that and the first one is where there is an agency involved in the process.
Which is the most common.
Absolutely, that's the one where it's going to be by far the most common. And then the last one is where you have more than one agency in the contract. So you have an umbrella supplying the worker to an agency who might also then be backing that contract off from a managed service provider in a tiered agency approach, who is then contracting with the end client. So relatively straightforward. If you look at the diagram, you'll see an envelope against various parties in different boxes. In that case, it's always the umbrella. What do I mean by that is that's the bit whereby the strict PAYE liability, the requirement to operate payroll, is in existence and always has been. So that's the entity that has to operate pay-as-you-earn and NIC under the normal circumstances, both under current legislation and indeed under the new legislation as it comes. You'll see then there's a red box to the next entity, whether that's the end client, the agency, or the managed service provider. And that's the entity which will be liable under the joint and several liability legislation.
So in effect, if the umbrella does something untoward and a liability arises, HMRC can go for the umbrella and they can go to the party that's in the red box.
Exactly. And as we've talked about on the sessions already, it's a joint and several liability. They don't have to go after one in preference to another. They can go for one of them or both of them in that scenario.
Just quickly go through each of the 3 scenarios. The first one is an umbrella dealing direct with an end client. What we're saying there is an end client can also be joint severally held liable with the umbrella.
Yes.
And then in the second one, where you have the agency using inverted commas, normal position, where you have an agency in between an umbrella and end client, the agency will be joint and severally liable.
Yes.
And then in the third example, where you have an MSP sitting above the agency, then the MSP will be liable as well as the umbrella.
Yeah, and each of them brings in different challenges and different due diligence that's going to be required, depending on which model's in place. And who you are in that chain.
Can I ask a question? And this is not something that we've rehearsed. So in the second scenario, where we have the umbrella, the agency, and the end client, let's say an agency second tiers. So what do I mean by that? Let's say an agency has a contract for 500 engineers. It can only place 100 and gets other agencies to supply the rest of the labour. Let's say it's got another 10 agencies across the country that it goes to fulfil that contract. And then let's say each of those agencies have different umbrellas. Where does the liability stay there?
Well, actually, that probably falls more under the third example. So instead of managed service provider, you've just got agency 1 and agency 2.
So basically what we're saying is the agency at the top that divvies the work out.
Yes.
Yeah, and that makes it incredibly difficult, especially for your larger agencies, to manage the supply chain, doesn't it?
Yeah, you could be in a situation where you've engaged with your client to provide workers, and then you've subcontracted the supply of those workers to other agencies who you may know which umbrellas they use, or you may not. I suspect that there will be some pressure by the top agency to at least encourage, if not enforce, which umbrellas are used, because without that encouragement, the lower agency in the tier could be using all sorts of umbrellas that are doing all sorts of bad practice, and it's not going to be their liability. It's going to be the first tier, the managed service provider or the tier one agency in that example, that will be, for want of a better phrase, left holding the baby.